Even as we're just beginning to confront the magnitude of the shock caused by this pandemic, we need to wrap our minds around a painful truth. We're in the early stages of what is going to become a series of cascading crises reverberating throughout the world, and we will not be able to get back to anything resembling normal life unless the major powers in the world can find some way to cooperate and manage these problems together. The first phase has been the healthcare crisis in the world's major economies. The next phase is the economic paralysis, the magnitude of which we are only just beginning to comprehend. In the last 2 weeks, America lost 10 million jobs, exceeding the 8.8 million total jobs lost over 106 weeks during the 2008 to 2010 recession. But this is just the beginning. Next up will surely be the danger of countries defaulting. Italy entered the crisis with the highest level of public debt of the Eurozone countries and the third highest in the world. The country's debt will skyrocket now as it spends money to combat the economic fallout from COVID-19. Next come the explosions in the developing world. So far, the numbers of infected have been low in countries like India, Brazil, Nigeria, and Indonesia, probably because they're less linked by trade and travel than the advanced world. In addition, these countries have tested very few people, which is keeping their numbers artificially low. But unless we get lucky and it turns out that heat does temper the virus, these countries will all get hit, and hard. And then there are the oil states. Even if the quarrel between Saudi Arabia and Russia gets resolved, at this point, demand for oil has collapsed and will not soon recover. Consider what that means for countries like Libya, Nigeria, Iran, Iraq, and Venezuela, where oil revenues make up the vast majority of government revenue, the vast majority of the economy. Expect political turmoil, refugees, revolutions, crackdowns, maybe terrorism. All of this might happen on a scale we haven't seen for decades. The world has entered this pandemic with two challenges. It is awash in debt, government and private. With a total global GDP of 90 trillion, public and private debt add up to 260 trillion. The world's two leading economies, the United States and China, have public and private debt to GDP ratios of 210% and 310%, respectively. Now, this would all be manageable if not for the second challenge. This crisis is occurring at a time when global cooperation has collapsed, and the traditional leader and organizer of such efforts, the United States of America, has abandoned that role entirely. Last month, the G7 meeting was not even able to issue a joint statement on the pandemic because the U.S. refused to sign anything that did not label the disease the Wuhan virus, a dispute that sounds like something that comes out of high school. The centerpiece of any global effort would have to be close cooperation between the United States and China. Instead, that relationship is in free fall, with each side deflecting blame on itself by blaming the other. The follow-up to the G7, the G20 meeting, was also a dud. Even the European Union has been late to recognize the seriousness of this crisis, the most serious crisis in its existence. A rash statement by the head of the European Central Bank caused Italy's worst stock market crash in the country's history. Now, what would be achieved by greater global cooperation? Well, since so much of the containment strategy involves travel, it would be far more effective if travel bans and advisories were coordinated. During the 2008-09 recession, central banks and governments worked with each other to help contain and dampen financial contagion. If countries like Iraq and Nigeria explode, the cost in refugees, disease, terrorism would all make us wish we had tried harder to manage their fall. If the richest countries pool funds and share information, that will speed up the arrival of treatments and vaccines. And when the time comes to reopen economies, coordinated action on trade and travel, for instance, would give us all the biggest bang for the buck. The problem we face is broad and global, but unfortunately, the responses are increasingly narrow and parochial. For more, go to cnn.com/Fareed and read my Washington Post column this week.